In this video, we're going to be studying epithelial tissue, its characteristics, functions. We'll learn how to classify epithelial tissue, and then we'll also look at a number of examples. As you can just see from this picture, epithelial tissue is found all over the body, from the heart and lungs to the small and large intestine, the bladder, and even the skin. Epithelial tissue, or epithelium, is one of the four primary body tissues. That's along with connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Epithelial tissue are covering tissues. They cover exposed surfaces, they line passageways and cavities, and they compose or make up glands. So when I say cover exposed surfaces, that can be external surfaces like the skin, or it can be internal surfaces like the bladder. It can line passageways like the urethra, or even a salivary gland duct, or a mammary gland duct. And it lines cavities like the heart and lungs, and it makes up glands as well. Let's look at some of the characteristics of epithelial tissue. They're tightly packed. Here's a picture showing some epithelium. Notice that these cells are close together. The purple is the nucleus and the pink is the cytoplasm. So there's very little intercellular space here. There's not a lot of space in between the cells. One of the ways they stay so tightly bound together or tightly packed is through these binding proteins here called desmosomes. You can see an enlarged version here, which is connecting two adjacent cells. We also have these gap junctions, which we'll learn about later, and maybe tight junctions as well. There's an exposed surface. For example, on this picture, the exposed surface is up here. The exposed surface is usually referred to as the apical surface. And there's also a basal surface. That's at the bottom. Here's the basal surface here. The basal surface is attached to what's called the basement membrane. The basement membrane is difficult to see, but if you look, you can see a light pink thin line. This would be the basement membrane. So the basement membrane is extracellular material. It's secreted by the basal layer in addition to some of this underlying connective tissue. But all epithelium has that. It has an apical surface and a basal surface, in addition to a basement membrane. It's also avascular. Avascular means without any vessels. So there are no blood vessels here. You won't find any arteries or veins or capillaries. That means that in order for this epithelium to receive oxygen and nutrients and transport waste, it has to diffuse through this underlying tissue here. So all of that takes place through diffusion across these cells. It's avascular. It's also highly mitotic. It means there's lots of mitosis. It divides often. The layer that's dividing is this basal layer down here. So we would consider these stem cells, if you will. They're actively dividing all the time. Let's look at the function of epithelium. Provides a protective barrier, absorbs, secretes, and also provides sensation. Notice the acronym PASS. If you want to pass anatomy, you've got to study. PASS. Epithelium provides a protective barrier against abrasion, against pathogens, against chemicals, and against desiccation. Desiccation just means drying out. So basically, your epithelium is keeping certain things in and certain things out. For example, here's your skin. The epithelium is this top layer in pink, not this orangish or layer here. It's more this pinkish purple layer. It would protect the underlying organs from abrasion. This epithelium would prevent pathogens from entering your body and chemicals from entering your body. Also keeps the cells underneath from drying out. Epithelia also absorb organic molecules, electrolytes, vitamins, water. They also secrete. We have gland cells that produce secretions, for example, acids, enzymes, and hormones. This is a slide of your small intestine here. The epithelium is this outer covering. So in this case, if you were to eat food, you know that food and water would pass through your small intestine, and as it does, these epithelial cells would absorb organic molecules like carbohydrates and electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and vitamins and water. There's also gland cells located in here too that provide secretions and enzymes. Like in your stomach, hydrochloric acid is released. Your pancreas, for example, releases enzymes. Also, your salivary gland releases enzymes. Your pancreas also releases hormones. Another function of the epithelium is sensation. There's specialized neuroepithelium found in sense organs, like your sense of smell, taste, sight, equilibrium, and hearing. Here's just one example of that. This is your olfactory nerve. This is located in your nose. You can see this is your nose right at the top. You have this olfactory bulb, and these are special sensing neuroepithelium, which we'll talk more about later. Let's look at how we classify epithelium. We classify based on the number of cell layers and the shape of the cells at the exposed surface, or that would be at the apical surface. So number and shape. Notice what we have here. Simple, simple, simple. Simple means one layer. And then we have stratified, stratified, stratified. Stratified means multiple layers. And then we also have shape, which would be squamous, squamous, cuboidal, cuboidal, columnar, and columnar. So you want to familiarize yourself with this picture. So first, classification by number. Simple. Simple means a single layer of cells that cover the basement membrane. Simple epithelia are thin and fragile. Since a single layer can't provide much mechanical protection, you don't find it in exposed area of the body. You find it in protected areas in the body, like internal passageways and cavities, like in the heart and in blood vessels. You also find it in areas where you need a lot of secretion and absorption and filtration, places like in the small intestine and in the lungs, where gases are needed to exchange quickly. So the single layer allows for a rapid diffusion across it. We have stratified. Stratified is when we have several layers that cover the basement membrane. Stratified epithelium are found in areas where there's more mechanical or chemical stress, like in the skin, in the mouth, the throat, esophagus, vagina, rectum, and anus. But whether it's simple or it's stratified, the layer that's dividing, or the stem cell layer, will always be at the basement membrane or at the basal surface. Let's look at shape. We have three shapes. We have squamous. Squamous cells are thin and flat. They have an irregular shape. They kind of look like a fried egg. I believe that squamous means like plate-like or scale. Next we have cuboidal. The cells are hexagonal, but they actually appear like a cube or like a square when you're looking at sectional views. We have columnar, which is just like what it sounds. It's a column. So it's similar to cuboidal, but taller. So it appears like a rectangle. And then let's add two other layers here. Maybe layers was a poor choice. Let's add two other words, not really layers. Pseudo-stratified. You know what pseudo means? That means false. So this gives the appearance that the cells are stratified, but the cells are not. They actually all connect to the basement membrane. And we'll see some examples of this. And in terms of shape, we have these transitional epithelium, and the shape of the cell depends on the degree to which it's stretched. You would find transitional epithelium in places like the bladder. Now let's go through some examples of epithelia. First, let's look at simple squamous. So notice simple means one layer, and squamous means flat or plate-like. So we already discussed that simple squamous epithelium is found in a variety of locations in the body. This is what it looks like. It looks kind of like fried eggs when when viewed from this vantage point. So here it is, kind of fried eggs and flat. But if you were to look at a different section of it, like just this portion, it would just look like this, just a single layer. So oftentimes we see simple squamous like this. This is connective tissue down here. This is the simple squamous epithelium. Here's another example. This is a blood vessel. You can see the blood cells inside, and then lining the blood vessel is simple squamous epithelium. So these are the nuclei of the simple squamous epithelium. This would be the cytoplasm here. It's not shown as well. So simple squamous epithelium. Here's the alveoli of the lungs. Remember, gas needs to exchange rapidly. So this is a single layer, simple squamous epithelium found in the lungs. Now, there's a lot going on here that we'll discuss later in the course, but we're looking at a portion of the kidney right now. We're not going to concern ourselves with this. What we're working with here is this thin layer that's covering this Bowman's capsule. It's one thin layer of flat cells that makes it simple squamous epithelium. Now let's look at stratified squamous. So we still have the same shape, still that flat shape, but it's going to be many layers. So notice this is the apical layer, or the exposed surface. This is the basal layer down here. And then this right here, which is difficult to see, is the basement membrane. It's shown pretty well here in this cartoon drawing. But also notice that the shape of these cells don't look squamous. But when you get to the exposed or the apical surface, then they do look flat. So when we name cells, we're looking at their shape at the exposed or apical surface. Remember, this is where they're rapidly dividing. This is the basal surface. This is the exposed or apical surface. And this is just connective tissue down here. So here's another stratified squamous. Stratified because there's many layers, and squamous because it's flat. This is simple squamous epithelium found in the esophagus. So this would be the basement membrane down here. This would be connective tissue down here. These would be the cell nuclei that I'm pointing to. And then this other stuff would be the cytoplasm. But this is all stratified squamous epithelium. Here's some more stratified squamous. You can see it doesn't look squamous here, but when you get towards the apical surface, it's flat and squamous. This is a section from an eyelid. This is stratified squamous epithelium found in the vagina. Notice these two pictures appear to be the same. The difference between them is their magnification. This one is zoomed out, and this one is zoomed in. Can you look at it and see where the stratified squamous epithelium is? Yeah, it's right there. This is the epithelium here. And when you look at it under higher power, you see, oh yeah, there's many layers to it, and they're flat like pancakes, so stratified squamous. And then this layer here would be the basal layer, and then the basement membrane. Now we have stratified squamous, but we have something called keratinized. So it's just like the stratified squamous we looked at, but there's something different. This is zoomed out, doesn't look any different right now. We zoom in a little further, we see there's actually two layers to this stratified squamous. And then we go in even further, and these layers become distinctive. So this is all stratified squamous, but this top layer are keratinized cells. So this would be like the surface of your skin. This says even palmar skin, so skin found on your palm. Notice that you can't see the nuclei because the nuclei have died. These keratinocytes are not living. They're just cells filled with a protein called keratin. Here's another example. It's a comparison. This is non-keratinized over here, and this is keratinized. So this is the esophagus or the vagina. I'm not sure which one. Histologically, they're very similar. And this is the skin. Notice they're both stratified squamous, but this keratinized epithelium has this thin layer where there's no nuclei present. This is the keratin. This would be the surface of your skin. Now let's look at transitional epithelium. This is a special epithelium, really only found in a couple of places. This looks a lot like stratified squamous epithelium, so it can be confusing. See, there's the appearance of strata, but if you look more carefully, actually all the cells are attached to the basement membrane. That's why it's called pseudo-stratified, not really stratified. And the best way to tell, I think, is looking at this apical surface. They're not flat like squamous, they're more like balloon or bubble-like. So this is a relaxed epithelium. This might be, from the bladder even, right? So this is an empty bladder, and in the full bladder, you can see they're more stretched out. Here's another example. This is from the urethra. So it looks like stratified squamous. This would be the basement membrane here. And then this is the apical surface. But if you look at the apical surface, notice they're not flat and squamous. They're more rounded at the top. Transitional epithelium, again, you really can't see too well from this picture, but based on the overall shape of this, it looks like it's an organ that's designed to expand. Maybe it's a urethra or bladder, I don't know for sure, but you can tell that it's going to be expanding. That's what transitional epithelium does. We'll study this later when we study the urinary system. And here's one last picture of transitional epithelium. Notice it looks like stratified squamous, but at the top, it's not flat or plate-like. It's got those kind of roundish or balloon-like appearance to it. Let's look at some simple cuboidal epithelium. Simple because there's one layer, and cuboidal because the cells have a cube-like shape. So we're looking at simple cuboidal here. This is from one of the tubules of the kidney, also found in places like the ducts of glands. So this would be like a cross-section. This would be a longitudinal section. Notice they both appear to be cuboidal, though. Same thing here in the real image. Here is the cross-section. This is a longitudinal section. Notice the basement membrane is visible. The nuclei are also clear. Here's another slide showing slightly different sectioning. These are simple cuboidal here. You can see the basement membrane here as well. And these are also simple cuboidal, just a slightly different sectioning, a little more oblique rather than cross-sectional. But this would be the lumen or the opening. This would be the same thing, the opening. Here's 4 ducts, all simple cuboidal. Notice the basement membrane as well. This would be the lumen or the opening. Here's the lumen again. These are just simple cuboidal shown in a different section. So one layer of cube-like cells. Now stratified cuboidal, that's just multiple layers of cuboidal cells. This is the duct of a sweat gland. Looks like we have 2 layers of cuboidal cells, so stratified cuboidal. Here's another stratified cuboidal. This is from the salivary gland underneath the tongue. Multiple layers. Cells look cuboidal in shape. Here would be the basement membrane. This would be the lumen or the passageway or opening. Here's an ovarian follicle. Looks like we have multiple layers of cuboidal-like cells, so stratified cuboidal. Simple columnar, one layer of column-like cells. This is from the small intestine. Notice the column-like cell shape, and then the microvilli and the nucleus. This is the basement membrane, and then the connective tissue that's underneath it. All these things are visible in the actual preparation too. Here's the connective tissue, and here's the basement membrane. And then these are the columnar cells, shaped like a column, and then there's the nucleus. All the rest of this would be the cytoplasm. And on the top here are the microvilli. We'll learn about microvilli when we study the digestive system, but the microvilli are just protrusions or extensions of the cell membrane that help increase the surface area and aid with absorption. Here's more simple columnar epithelium from the small intestine. This is just zoomed out a little bit. Notice the column-like shape. And then this is the microvilli there. This would be the basement membrane. Now let's look at stratified columnar. Multiple layers of column-like cells. Here's the basement membrane. Notice they don't look columnar here, but when we get towards the surface, they do. They look columnar. This would be the lumen or the opening. This is from a salivary gland duct. Here's another example of stratified columnar. This is from the urethra. I think just certain sections of the urethra have this type of epithelium. So multiple layers, and the top layer is clearly columnar. This brings us to our last type, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So pseudostratified because it's not really stratified. Remember that they actually are in contact. All the cells are in contact with the basement membrane. And ciliated because it has these cilia on the apical surface. So look at these. Appears to be stratified. Notice the appearance of stratification, but all the cells actually do touch this basement membrane. So it's pseudostratified. Then we have these cilia up here, pretty visible here as well. What these cilia do, you find them in the respiratory epithelium, like in your trachea and windpipe. These cilia beat synchronously, like together all at once, kind of beat like oars. And any type of dust particle or mucus that you might have in your throat, like when you clear your throat, what that is it's a cilia moving it up to the to your mouth where you can actually kind of cough it up or spit it up. So these are like hair-like projections that beat in unison and keep debris away from your lungs. Here's another image. You can see the cilia up here. It looks stratified again, but a closer examination would reveal these are all in contact with the basement membrane. So this is pseudostratified ciliated columnar. Again, from the lungs.